So have you heard about this thing happening in Spain? Urban guys, they're like macking up and moving to the countryside.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. It's not just a lifestyle change either.
Oh,
It's
look.
showing up all over their books and movies, too.
Exactly, and that's what we're going to deep dive into today.
Yeah.
Some of these works, Los Asquerosos, Terra Alta, and Un Hipster en la España Vacía,
Oh, yeah.
and then some films too.
Yeah.
Lo que arde and As Bestas. You familiar with those?
Yeah, those are all great examples. What's really cool is how they show like a changing view of rural Spain. For a long time, the countryside was seen as like backwards, a place you wanted to leave.
Yeah.
But then after the 2008 crisis, this whole new narrative started coming out.
Oh, yeah. Like a longing for that simpler life.
Totally.
That authenticity, you know?
Mhm.
And it made me think back to some of those classic Spanish films like La Ciudad No Es Para Mí, the whole Toledo thing.
Oh, yeah.
The country bumpkin, always the butt of the joke.
Yeah.
But now it seems like the rural is getting kind of like reimagined.
Exactly. It's like the resituated rural, this term from the scholar Enric Castelló. He's challenging those simple ideas about empty Spain and is pushing for a deeper, more complex understanding of what rural life is really like.
Yeah, so it's not just a nostalgic return to, like grandma's farm.
Yeah.
These works are giving a more nuanced perspective.
Exactly. Yeah, they're exploring why these guys are going back, what problems they face, and what their impact is on these rural communities.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes it so interesting. So let's dig into some of these examples. You mentioned Los Asquerosos before.
Yeah.
What's the story there?
So it follows this guy, Manuel, who's running from a criminal charge in Madrid.
Oh, wow.
He finds this abandoned village and just totally embraces this solitary life. The novel uses dark humor to critique urban sprawl and consumerism. Manuel's uncle, who's the narrator, uses this term la mochufa to describe those intrusive city people.
La mochufa? I've never heard that one. What's that mean?
Literally, it's the chufa. It's like a type of tuber.
Okay.
But it's used to make fun of those people that invade rural areas without understanding or respecting their way of life.
They're seen as a nuisance.
Totally, yeah, like weeds taking over a garden.
I see. So it's not just about physical space. It's about values clashing and different ways of living.
Exactly. And even though Manuel really enjoys being isolated at first, the novel also looks at what can go wrong with being alone and the dark sides that can exist even in places that seem idyllic and rural.
So it's not all sunshine and roses out there in the resituated rural.
Not always. And that's what makes these stories so interesting. They make us rethink what we think about city life and rural life and show us that the line between them isn't always so clear.
That's really interesting. Let's switch gears to Lo que arde. Didn't this film win a bunch of awards?
Yeah, it's a really beautiful film visually by Oliver Laxe. It tells the story of Amador, an ex-con who goes back to his home in rural Galicia after serving time for arson.
An arsonist. Going back to a place known for its forests. That sounds a little dicey.
It's more complicated than that. The film really focuses on Amador's attempts to fit back into the community and find peace, mostly through his connection with nature, caring for his mother and their cows.
So there's this sense of redemption through being close to nature.
Exactly. And it's that connection to nature that's at the heart of how the film shows rural masculinity. It goes against those old ideas of being tough and dominant. Amador represents a gentler, more harmonious relationship with the environment.
You mentioned eco-anxiety before. How does that play into the film?
Well, because Amador is so connected to nature, he's super aware of how fragile it is. He sees how destructive commercial interests can be, especially those eucalyptus plantations that are replacing native forests.
So it's not just about getting away from the city. It's about dealing with the environmental challenges that rural Spain is facing.
Yeah, exactly. And the film also shows how complex rural communities can be with their economic struggles and social divisions, which make it hard for someone like Amador to really belong. Let's look at Terra Alta, now a crime novel by Javier Cercas. It follows Melchor, a policeman who leaves behind a troubled past in Barcelona. He goes to this seemingly peaceful village of Terra Alta looking for a fresh start.
Another urbanite seeking solace in the countryside. But being a crime novel, I'm guessing things aren't as peaceful as they first appear.
Right, you hit the nail on the head. The novel quickly shows this darker side to rural life. Melchor gets caught up in a murder mystery, and as he investigates, it exposes the power struggles and economic issues lurking beneath the surface.
That's interesting. Tell me more about these power dynamics. Who's really calling the shots in this rural community?
The novel brings up this idea of the cacique, a powerful figure who basically controls the rural economy. In Terra Alta, it's Francisco Adel, a wealthy factory owner. Everyone in the village relies on him for their livelihood, creating this sort of stratified masculinity.
So it's almost like a feudal system. The men working for Adele are stuck in a subordinate role with limited options.
Exactly. The novel even portrays Adele being verbally abusive to his managers, highlighting his dominance and control. It challenges this romanticized view of rural Spain as a haven of freedom and escape. It shows how these communities can be just as bound by economic forces and social hierarchies as urban areas.
It makes you wonder if those city dwellers looking for a simpler life are walking into something they haven't fully grasped. It's not just about escaping the city. It's about understanding how complex rural life truly is.
Absolutely. And talking about complexities, let's move on to Asbestas, a film drawn from a real-life crime.
This is the one about the Dutch man who was murdered in Galicia, right?
Yes. Asbestas, directed by Rodrigo Sorogoyen, is based on that tragic incident. The film centers on a French couple trying to integrate into a remote Galician village. They clash with the local Alta brothers over their different views on rural development, particularly a windmill project.
Sounds like the classic city versus country conflict. Outsiders coming in and disrupting the traditional way of life.
The film explores that tension, but it also adds layers of complexity. The Alta brothers, though, portrayed as rough and aggressive, are shown to have their own aspirations for city life. They're aware of their limited opportunities and their marginalized position.
So it's not a simple case of city folks versus country folks. The lines are more blurred than that. What about the portrayal of masculinity in Asbestas?
The film delves into the intricacies of rural masculinity. The Alta brothers are products of their environment, shaped by poverty, tradition, and a lack of options. There's this sense of desperation in their actions, a longing for something more.
And the windmill project embodies that tension, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It symbolizes progress and economic opportunity, but at the same time, it threatens their way of life.
Exactly. It highlights the clashing interests and values playing out in rural Spain. And it's interesting you bring up the windmill project because our last film, Suro, also explores this conflict between urban ideals and rural realities, but from a different angle.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me about Suro.
Suro introduces us to Helena and Ivan, a city couple who inherit a cork farm. They have these idealistic notions about embracing rural values, but soon they face ethical dilemmas and conflicts with their workers who are both Spanish and Moroccan.
So their good intentions meet the realities of running a business in a rural community. What kind of conflicts come up?
The film does a great job of showing how Ivan, despite his progressive ideals, starts to resemble the cacique figure from Terra Alta. The pressure of managing the farm and making a profit forces him to compromise his values.
So he becomes part of the very system he was trying to escape. What about the migrant workers? How do they fit into the narrative?
Their presence adds another layer of complexity. Sur explores the tensions between traditional rural masculinity and the masculinity of the migrant workers who are often perceived as a threat to the local way of life.
It highlights the competition for resources and recognition that can exist in rural areas. Does the film show the challenges and prejudices these migrant workers face?
Absolutely. They're often given the hardest and most dangerous jobs, and their rights are overlooked. However, the film also showcases their resilience and determination. There's even a scene where Ivan tries to stand up for them, but is reminded that he's the jefe, the boss. His attempts to be progressive clashed with the harsh economic realities of the countryside.
So even with good intentions, navigating the complexities of rural life, particularly the power dynamics and social hierarchies, proves to be really challenging. It seems like a lot of these stories show how hard it is to truly escape the systems we try to leave behind.
That's definitely a key takeaway, for sure.
We spent all this time talking about these guys returning to rural Spain.
Yeah.
But like we touched on earlier, there's this other piece to this whole thing.
Yeah.
The role of women in this resituated rural... It's not just a bunch of guys out there, is it?
Not at all. In fact, a lot of these stories really show how strong and resilient women are in these rural communities.
Mm-hmm.
Their experiences are so important to understanding what's going on.
Can you give me some examples? I'm having trouble connecting the dots when it comes to how women are portrayed.
Sure. Let's start with Los Asquerosos. It's mostly about Manuel living his solitary life.
Right.
But there's this important female character, Joaquin.
Okay.
At first, she seems like just another annoying city person. One of those...
The Huachamacalit.
Mochufas.
Batufas, yeah. What was that again?
La mochufa. It literally means the chufa, which is this type of tuber.
Right, yeah.
It's meant to be insulting, like they're weeds invading rural spaces.
Right, the Chufa people. But you're saying there's more to her than that.
Exactly. She's resourceful, resilient. And in the end, she's a big reason why Manuel survives. She challenges his prejudices and shows him that even with all the tension between urban and rural values, you can still find connections and allies in unexpected places.
Interesting. It reminds me of Amador's mother in Lo que arde benedicta.
Mm,
She's like this pillar of strength, giving Amador a sense of belonging and purpose.
totally. And the film really subtly highlights her connection to nature. Remember that scene where she's taking shelter under a tree during that rainstorm? It's like she's drawing strength from the earth itself. She really embodies this deep understanding of the rural world that goes way beyond stereotypes.
I'm noticing a pattern here. It seems like in a lot of these stories, the men are running from something,
Yeah.
while the women are staying put, holding things together.
Right.
They have this real sense of rootedness.
That's a great observation. And it speaks to this bigger idea of resituating the rural, not just physically, but also in how we understand it culturally. These stories make us rethink the role of women in these communities, their resilience, their knowledge, and what they contribute to rural life.
So we talk about the women in Los Asquerosos and Lo que arde. What about the other ones? Do we see more strong, independent women?
Definitely. In Terra, Alta, Melchior's wife, Olga, is super important to his transformation. She helps him heal from his past trauma and find peace in the countryside. She's not afraid to call him out when he starts falling back into his old ways.
So she's not just along for the ride. She's actively shaping his journey and challenging those patriarchal ideas he brings with him from the city.
Exactly. Even in Bestas, where the main conflict is between the French couple and the Anta brothers, the women aren't just background characters. Antoine's wife is strong and independent and stands up to the hostility she faces. There's even a scene where she confronts her husband about his controlling behavior, showing that patriarchy exists everywhere, not just in rural areas.
It's like these stories are subtly pushing back against this idea that the city is progressive and the countryside is backwards.
Right.
Gender dynamics are complicated no matter where you live.
Exactly. And in Sushal, even though the film is mostly about Yvonne changing his wife, Helena is like a counterpoint. She's drawn to the countryside, but she's more aware of the ethical side of what they're doing. She questions Yvonne's choices and represents a different way of thinking about rural life, one that focuses on sustainability and social responsibility.
So even in a story that seems to be about men and their problems, there's this subtle critique of patriarchy.
Yeah.
The women are raising important questions about exploitation, the environment, and what it really means to be a community.
You got it. That's why it's so important to pay attention to these female characters. They give us this whole other perspective on the resituated rural, one that's more complex, nuanced, and ultimately hopeful.
We've covered a lot of ground today. We explored this trend of men from cities going back to rural Spain, the reasons for going, the struggles they face, and how they're both changing and reinforcing old ideas about masculinity. But we also talked about how strong the women are in these communities and how crucial they are in shaping this resituated rural.
Absolutely. It's given us a much richer and more complicated understanding of rural Spain. It's not just a place to escape to. It's a dynamic and evolving place shaped by both the men and women who call it home. And as these stories show, the resituated rural is about a cultural shift, a reevaluation of what's important, and a search for a more authentic and sustainable way of life.
I keep thinking about this idea of resituating. Resituating ourselves geographically, our values, and how we understand masculinity and femininity.
Yeah.
These stories are asking us to question what we think we know and to be open to a more fluid and inclusive vision of life in the 21st century.
I love that. That's a great way to put it. These stories aren't just entertainment, they're challenges. They make us ask ourselves who we are, where we belong, and what kind of future we want to build. They remind us that the rural world isn't some relic of the past. It's a vital and evolving place with so much potential for both challenges and transformation.
It makes me wonder what's next.
Yeah.
Will these trends lead to a revitalized and fair rural Spain where everyone can thrive?
Yep.
Or will we just see the same old power dynamics playing out in a new setting?
That's the big question, isn't it? There's no easy answer. But these stories give us the tools to have that conversation, to think critically, and to imagine new possibilities.
And that's what the Deep Dive is all about. Thanks for coming along with us on this journey. Until next time, keep diving.